Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Kof Gimel. We plan to complete the 8th perek and begin the 9th on this daf. Amar Rabba Amar Rav Nachman. Hayman de ogar le beta lechavre le'eser shanin. Someone rents out his house to someone else for 10 years. Vechatav le'shetara. And they write a contract that says, I'm renting it out for 10 years. We're going to see they left out a date on the contract. So it's not clear when the 10 years begins. The landlord said, at some point later on, some years later on, he says, you already lived here for 10 years, right? I owe you, based on this document, a rental for 10 years. I owe you have a right to rent for 10 years, but 5 years has already passed. Now, since there's no date on it, and the renter has no proof, if the renter has proof that he moved in, right, on this date, and it was only 3 years, then the renter will be believed if he has proof. But if he has no proof, and all we have is a document that says 10 years altogether, then the landlord is believed, right? He's the owner, he's the chazaka, he's the owner of the land, and let the renter come and prove otherwise. Amar leRavacha midifti leRavina, ele me'ata osfeh me'azu ze bishtara, v'amar le'peraticha palga, hachi nameh demeheman. So Ravacha from Difti tells Ravina, based on this law that Rav Nachman taught, can I derive the following, that if someone lends 100 dinar to someone else, and they have a contract, and then the borrower says, I paid you half, would you say also that he's believed? Basically, we're comparing the landlord to the renter, the landlord to the borrower. Just like the borrower owes 100, but he can claim 50 and he's believed. So too, the landlord in this case, so to speak, owes the rental of his house to the renter for 10 years, and if he claims 5, he's believed. And in both cases, there is a document, but the document only says the overall total of what has to be given, but doesn't say when part of it is given over or part of it is paid. So, just like the landlord is believed, so too, does that mean we should also believe the borrower? Navi says, no. Can you compare these two cases? They're not the same. Hatam shtadi gubayna ka'e. Imita defera'e iba ele lemichteba agabe. Ina memichtab ale tabra. Avalacha amar le hay dichtibi lach shetara ki hechi de la chazak techezak ale. The documents serve for completely different purposes and are actually held by different parties. In the case of a loan, the promissory note is going to be held on by the lender. So the lender can come and claim and say and show, look, you owe me, it says right here in the document. And he can use it at any time to collect the debt, right? That is the mechanism by which he collects the debt, and he proves you owe me. And therefore, since the document is there, held by the lender in order to collect the debt, if the borrower in fact paid half of it, then he has to make sure to either write within the document half paid and have the other guy sign it, or he has to ask for a receipt so that he can come and prove it's true. I borrowed $100, 100 dinar, and you have the document, but I have a receipt that I paid you half. So therefore, everybody knows if you don't have a receipt, if the renter does not have a receipt, then we will not believe him, because the loan document its very purpose is to be able to collect the entirety of it. And therefore, that is the proof, and the renter is not believed. Whereas the document for the rental is of a different nature. The landlord says, why did I write a document? It's actually so that you cannot claim chazakah. You see, we have a concept of chazakah. If someone squats on a property for 3 years, and he also has to have a claim, he has to explain how he got it. He has to say, you gifted it to me, I bought it from you. Even if he has no documentation regarding that, as long as he lives there for 3 years uncontested, then that's proof that his claim is correct. Assuming that the other person has no counter proof and didn't complain in the meantime. So the landlord says the reason why we wrote this document is to protect the landlord, right? The other one was to protect the lender, not the renter. not the borrowers. Protect the lender, not the borrower. And so it's held on by the lender is one that holds on to it. That's why the lender is believed to say, you owe me 100. It's not protecting the renter. The renter is equivalent to the landlord, right? As we said, they're the ones that are both on the hook. They have to give something. The borrower has to pay 100. The landlord has to give the right for the renter to live in his house for 10 years. And so this document is to protect the landlord, which is equivalent to the borrower, so that the landlord will make sure that the renter does not live there. He lives uncontested because he is a valid renter, and then all of a sudden he'll say, "Oh, it's my property." So that's why the landlord has a document to say, "Look, it says here you are a renter." That's the whole purpose of it. And he's not required every year to go say, "Okay, sign here that you lived here 1 year, sign here that you lived here 2 years, right? Give me a receipt that you lived here 5 years." That's not the point of that document. The point of the document is not to give a right to the renter to stay there for 10 years. It's actually protect the landlord. And therefore, the nature of the two documents is completely different. And therefore, we believe the landlord, and we do not believe a borrower unless the borrower has proof that he paid half. Amar Rav Nachman, Shoel Adam Betubo Le'olam. Amar Rav Mari, Be'erah Derav Shemuel, V'hu Dekane Mineh. Rav Nachman says a person can borrow something with the graciousness of the lender forever. This is like we say in Birkat Hamazon, Hazan et haolam kulo betuvo. Hashem gives sustenance to the world in His graciousness, right? All the time, every day. So too, I can come and borrow your hammer one time, and then once I return it, that's it. I returned it, and I have to ask you again to borrow it again. But let's say I'm always doing work, and your hammer is always out in the backyard there, and I don't want to have to ask you every time. So I ask you, hey, listen, you're such a good friend, right? And you're so gracious. Would you mind if I borrowed your hammer any time that I need it? And you agree, and you said, "Yeah, sure. Just come and get it anytime, right?" And I take it, I return it, I take it the next day, and I return it. Says that's perfectly valid. Ramari Bada, the son of the daughter of Shemuel, said that you have to do an acquisition. In other words, you can't just be a verbal agreement, because see, if we do it just once, then the fact that you give me the hammer, okay, that's the agreement, and I acquire the hammer for the uses that we agreed to for whatever, 1 day, 3 days, and I give it back. But if we're going to come and take it back and forth every time, we have to do some kind of transaction with a handkerchief or something in order to effectuate that deal. Amar Rav Mari bere de Rav Asher, umadar lekater. Rav Mari, the son of Rav Asher, different Rav Mari, says that if it breaks, have the hammer and it breaks, I still have to return the pieces, the parts of it. Right? I can't just say, well, you said I could borrow it, now broken, so you know what, I'll just keep the handle and use it for something else. I still would have to return it. Amar Rava, that's assuming, let's say, it breaks with normal usage, which a shoel is patur for. That's okay. But he doesn't have to pay for a new hammer, but he does have to return the pieces. Amar Rava, Hayman de Amar le lechavre, Oshlan maral lemirpak be hay pardesa, Rafik be hahu pardesa. If someone says, "Can you lend me your hoe, because I want to dig up this orchard," he says, "Hay pardesa." Well, then he can use it to dig up only that orchard that he said that he was going to dig it up with. He can't go and use it for a different one. This would be like if I say, "Can I borrow your car? I want to drive 3 blocks away." And you say, "Yes." And then I take your car and I drive it to Vegas. That's not permitted. You didn't give me the car for that purpose. I can only use it for the purpose that I said I'm going to use it for. However, if I say, "Pardesa," Rafik be kol pardesa deba'eh. If I say, I want to lend me your hoe because I want to dig up an orchard. I didn't say which one, I just said an orchard. Then I can dig up any orchard, a single orchard that I want, but only one, because I only said one. Paradise, if I ask for it in plural, right, lend me your hoe so I can dig up orchards, then Rafik Vazil kol pardesa di'it le umadar le kate. Then I can dig up all the orchards that I have, many of them. However, if it breaks, I do have to return the broken parts. The handle, let's say the handle is still in good order, I have to return that. You can still use the handle and attach it to another tool. Amar Rav Papa, Haiman damar lechavre, Oshlan hai gar guta venafla la bani la. If I say to you, lend me this well, I want to irrigate my field, can I use your well, draw some water from it, right? And I say this well. And then I come, and as I'm using it, the walls of the well fell down. So then I cannot rebuild it, because I said this well, and once a well collapses, that's it. That's not the well anymore. Even if I would dig it up in the same spot, that's a new well. I only borrowed this well, and therefore I cannot rebuild it. However, if I say gar garuta v'nafla banila, if I say, can I borrow a well? I didn't say which one, and so then I come and I'm going to use this one, but it falls down, it collapses, so I can dig it back up. And there's still a well, that's fine. Even though digging it up kind of creates a new one, even in the same spot, but still I said, can I borrow a well? And you said yes, so you have to provide a well to me. Begargaruta kariv azil kama gargute bar'e ad mitrame le. If I say, lend me a place for a well, and then I can go and dig over here and dig over there and keep digging until I find water. Sometimes you have to dig in a few spots till you find water. Since I asked you for a place of a well, so if this place doesn't work because there's no water there, then I can keep digging until I find one. But I have to make a formal acquisition, all right, in order to do this, because it's not like you're just giving me one item one time where that's the acquisition. We'll have to make some kind of kinyan with a handkerchief or something so that I acquire the right to go and take the well that you gave me. Next Mishnah. Hamaskir bayit lachavero v'nafal chayav la'amid lo bayit. Haya katan lo yasena gadol, gadol lo yasena katan. Echad lo yasenu shenayim, shenayim lo yasenu echad. Lo yivchot min hachalonot v'lo yosif alehem ela mida'at shenehem. If I rent a house from you and it falls down, so you have to give me another house. I rented a house from you. This house fell. You have to build another house that I can use, right? I'm giving you rent. Now, if I rented a small house, you cannot rebuild a big house. And if I rented a big house, you cannot rent me a small house. Now, that one makes sense, right? I wanted a big house. I have a lot of kids. I need a lot of bedrooms. You can't make a small house. The other way around is also true. If I want a small house, if I rented a small house, I don't want a big house. You have to make more heat. Utility bills are greater, more cleaning. I want a small house, and you have to build me a small house if that's what I rented. If it has one room, then you can't make a house with two rooms. If it has two rooms, you cannot make a house with one room. And you cannot make less windows. And not more windows, right? I want just the same number of windows that I had in the house that I originally rented. More windows, maybe I don't want less because I want more light. Maybe I don't want more because the cold comes in. So we cannot change anything unless we both agree. If we both agree and you say, listen, the old house was kind of dark. You mind if I put more windows? And say, yeah, that would be a good idea. That's fine. Hechidame. Now we ask about the Mishnah. What's the exact case? Idamar lebayit zeh nefal azal le. If in the rental agreement, I said, I want to rent this house. Well, the house is gone. So then the landlord has no further obligation, right? You wanted this house. The house is gone. That would be like if I rented this car. Okay, this car, and then that car is demolished. Then you don't have to give me another car. I only rented this car. Which is different from like a rental agency where if I get a car from Hertz, they have to give me a car, and then if it gets damaged, they have to give me another one. But if I'm a personal thing, I want this car. Okay, this house is gone. That's it. Then the agreement is over. If on the other hand, I didn't say I'm going to rent you this house, I said I'll rent you a house. Well, in that case, I just have to rent you a house, any house. And so, if it had one room, why can't I make it two rooms? If it was small, why can't I make it big? I just said I'm going to rent you a house. There happened to be a house standing there that was a certain size, it's true, but that house fell down, so I'm responsible to give you a house, any house. I can build it however I want. So, what would be the case of the Mishnah where I have to build it exactly like it was? Because if I said this house, and this house fell, then I don't have to give you anything because that house is gone. If I said a house, then I can build it however I want. Amar Shakish Amar le bayit shani maskir lecha midat orko kach vekach. So Shakish says, it's talking about a case where I say, the house that I'm going to rent to you is this size. It has this many rooms. It has this many windows. I specify all those things. That's why I have to build it the same way. Hold on. If that's true, then that's obvious. Why would the Mishnah have to say, what, if I make a deal with these specifications, I have to uphold my deal? Obviously you do. So rather, when Rabin came from Eretz Yisrael, he explained in the name of Resh Lakish, right, we had over here an answer by Resh Lakish that someone said, we don't know who said that one, but when Rabin came and said, he brought it with a clarification that I said, I'm going to rent you a house like this. In other words, I point to a house that's there. I say like this. So I didn't say the exact dimensions and specifications, but since I said like this, so I have to, and it falls down, so I do have to build and give you another house, because I didn't say this house, I said like this house. So that means I have to give you something. And since I didn't say just a house, but I said like this house, then I have to build it with the same specifications as that house. But still we say, what's the chidush? Isn't that obvious? If I said like this house, then I have to build it the same way. Isn't that obvious? Oh, we're talking about a case where the house was standing on the bank of a river. So I might have thought, when I say, I'll build you a house like this, what I was pointing to was the fact that it's right on the river, which is really nice. You can go fishing and look out on the river. And so I thought I might have said, I just promised you a house on the river, but I could build a small, the next one it fell down, I'll build you a small one, I'll build you a big one, and I didn't mean the specifications, and that's why the Mishnah has to come and teach me, when I said, like this, it's not just about the location, it's referring to the size and specs of the house, and therefore if it falls down, have to rebuild it the same way. Hadran alach hashoel. We now begin the 9th perek that picks up on many of the same issues and themes that we saw previously. Mishnah. המקבל שדה מחברו מקום שנהגו לקסור יקסור, לעקור יעקור, לחרוש אחריו יחרוש, הכל כמנהג המדינה. Someone receives the field from someone else. Receives means as a sharecropper, that he would have to give a certain percentage to the owner, and he works, or he gives a certain amount if he's a tenant farmer. And there are different ways of harvesting the field. So if you're in a place where the standard is to cut the produce, so you cut it so that then you take the top and you leave the bottom in the field, that's good for the field, then it stays in there and it fertilizes the ground, so it's good for next time. And it's also easier to do. Easier to cut than to uproot. So if you're in a place where everybody cuts it, then he has to cut it. But if you're in a place where everybody uproots the field, maybe you want to clear it away and you're going to use it for something else, you want it to be totally clear. Although that does take more work. But if that's the standard that they do, then that's what the sharecropper has to do. He has to uproot it. If the custom is that they then plow it after harvesting, then he has to plow it. Everything follows the regional custom. So if they specify, listen, I'm going to do it this way, and everybody agrees, fine. But if they don't specify, you have to follow the usual regional custom. כשם שחולקין בתבואה, כך חולקין בתבן ובקש, כשם שחולקין ביין, כך חולקין בזמרות ובקנים, ושניהם מספקים את הקנים. And now, just like they share in the produce, let's say it's 70-30. The sharecropper can keep 70 and he gives 30% to the owner. So too, they share in the stubble and the straw that's useful as fertilizer or to feed to the animals. And just like they split the wine that they're going to make from the grapes, so too they will divide the branches and the poles. The branches, when you prune the vines of the vines that are not producing so much, so you prune them so the other ones will produce more, and those are good wood. You could use it for burning. And the poles that you use to for the vines, you have to put them on poles to direct them. And so they both split the poles, and they actually both have to also supply the poles. As the vine grows, then you're going to have to add more poles to hang the vines on them. So it makes sense, since they're both providing the poles, they're sharing, they also can split the poles if they don't need them anymore and they're taking it back. Tana, makom shenagu liksod eno rashay la'akor eno rashay liksod, ushnehem me'akebin ze al ze. A baraita expands on the Mishnah, and if you're in a place where everybody cuts the produce, then you're not allowed to uproot it, and if the custom is to uproot it, then the sharecropper is not allowed to cut it. And each of them can prevent the other from doing anything different. Get liksod eno rashay la'akor. Now we're going to examine the different parts of this baraita. So it says that if you're in a place where usually everybody cuts, you're not allowed to uproot. Now, why would they prefer cutting? It's going to give both sides. The owner of the field will say, I want you to cut it and leave the base in the ground, because that will be good to fertilize the ground for next season. And it's also good for the sharecropper, because if you ask him to uproot, he'll say, I don't want, that's a lot of work. And so he would also, he has a reason to prefer to cut. Now, if it happens to be that the owner doesn't want it and wants it uprooted, so then the sharecropper can say, no, it's too much work, and everybody here cuts it, so therefore I can cut it, and vice versa. Lakor eno rashay liksor, hay amar ba'ina detinaker ad'ai, v'hay amar ba'ina tibna. And they both might have a legitimate reason why they would want to follow the local custom to uproot. The owner of the field can say, I want it to be cleared of stubble. I want it to be totally clear. And that's the custom, so he can demand that. And the sharecropper can say, I want to, even if the owner says, no, I want you to cut it because I want the stubble there, I want to leave it there as fertilizer. The sharecropper can say, yeah, but the custom here is to uproot it, and I want to uproot it, even though it might be more work, because I want the stubble. I'm going to uproot it, then I can keep it. Well, I can keep part of it, right? I have to share it. And so each one has a legitimate claim, and therefore you have to follow the local custom. Ushnehem ma'akibin ze al ze. Lamali, why do you have to tell me they both have to follow the local custom? Each of them can prevent each other from deviating. Matam kamar, matam liksod eno rashay lakor, lakor eno rashay liksod, mishum tishnehem ma'akibin ze al ze. These 5 words in the Baraita are simply an explanation for what came before. Why is it that if the local custom is to cut, then you can't uproot, and if it's to uproot, then you cannot cut, because each one can prevent the other from deviating. Lacharosh acharav yacharosh. So if the custom is to plow after harvesting, then the sharecropper has to plow. Pishita, isn't that obvious? You have to do whatever the custom is. Lasricha batra de la menakeshe, vazal ihu venakesh. Oh, we need to say this, that to teach us that it applies even in a place where the custom is not to weed the field, right? You can do it like a multi-step process. First you weed the field, and then you also plow it. Some places they don't bother weeding the field, they just plow it. Okay, so, and it's in a place where people don't usually weed it, and this sharecropper, weeded it. Mahudetema amar le haidena kishna adata de la karibna la kamashmalan de ibaile lefarushe la lehem. So I might have thought that the sharecropper could say, listen, people around here don't usually weed, but weeding is a good thing. It's good for the ground, and I weeded it, and I had in mind, you know what, I'll do weeding instead of plowing. So I did this instead of that, so I can replace one thing with the other. I might have thought that that's true, and the answer, and this comes to teach us just not true. If the custom is to plow, then the sharecropper is going to have to plow. And even if he does something else in addition, that's up to him. But he can't just switch one thing for another without explicitly specifying, listen, I know the custom is to plow, but I'm going to weed instead, and then you plow later. And if they agree, fine. But if he doesn't tell them that, then he has to plow also. Hakol k'minhag medina. Now back to the Mishnah, it says everything follows the custom of the place. Hakol letuyemai. Why is it saying everything? It just listed a few examples. What is the word hakol coming to include that is not specified in this Mishnah? Letuyehad tanur banan. Makom shenahagu laskir ilanot al gabe karka maskirin. Makom shenahagu laskir en maskirin. It's coming to include that which we know explicitly in another braita. This is very interesting, the way but I thought might have further details that are not included in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is concise, but the Mishnah can hint to them by saying hakol. And when the teacher would recite the Mishnayot and teach it to the students by heart, and then he would say hakol. Listen, now I said hakol, I can add in some other baraitot that are a good commentary and are also applicable here. Okay, so this baraita teaches that if it's in a place where the owner also rents out the trees together with the land, then he has to rent out the trees. But if it's a place where they don't do that, then they don't. You see, the trees produce fruit on their own. Sharecropper doesn't have to do anything. And so there are some places where the owner says, listen, these are my trees. They're producing on their own. I'm keeping everything from all the produce from the trees, and you just work the land and give me part of the land. So that's some places. But there are other places where this is part of the deal. Even though you're not doing anything for the trees, since I'm giving you the land and you're working the land and we're sharing the produce of the land, you know what? You also get a share of what comes off the trees. So you have to follow the local custom, whatever it is. Now we're going to analyze this very braita that we just brought. Makom shenagu laskir maskirin. Peshita. The braita starts off and says, in a place where the landowner lets the sharecropper take part of the produce of the trees, then he has to let him do that. Isn't that obvious? We already know the principle that you follow whatever the regional custom is. La siricha de kula amaya בטלתה ועזל איהו ויהבה ברבעה. מהו דתמה דאמר לה, היידה בסטילך, הדעתה דלה יהיבנה לך באילנות. כמשמלן תיבאה לה לפרושה לה. No, we need this because it tells us chidush in the following case. Let's say you're in a place where usually the landowner allows the sharecropper to take part in the produce of the trees. And we're also in a place where usually the landowner only demands, landowner demands 1/3 of the produce. It tells the sharecropper, you can keep 2/3, you have to give me 1/3 of the produce. Now this particular landowner, he went and he offered the sharecropper a better deal and said, listen, you keep 3/4, I'm only going to take 1/4. And he didn't say why, and so the sharecropper just thought, he's a nice guy, he's giving me a good deal. Now, we might have thought that the landowner can come afterwards and say, oh, listen, do you know why I gave you a good deal? And said you only have to give me 1/4 instead of 1/3? Because I had in mind that you are not going to take any of the produce of the trees. Most people give the produce of the trees. I gave you a better deal. In exchange, I want all the produce of the trees. I might have thought that he can say that and that he can deviate from the normal custom of the place to give produce of the trees because he's taking less of a share of the produce of the field. And therefore, this line in the Mishnah comes to teach us that, no, you can't do that. If you want to do that, you have to specify that in advance, and you have to tell them, listen, I know most people, they give the produce of the trees. I want to keep all the produce for myself, but I'll lower my share. If they agree, that's fine, but you can't just assume that. Makom shenagu shelo lahaskir en maskirin. A place where they do not give out the produce of the trees, then he does not have to rent out the trees also. Isn't that also obvious? Pishita, we know, we follow the local custom. La siricha de kol ma mekabele beriv'a ve'atui ve'azal ihu ve'kebela betilta. Ma'u detema amar le hay ditfai lach ada'ata dihabt li ba'ilanot. Kamashmalan di'ba'ele lefarushe le. This also will teach us the opposite case. Let's say you're in a place where most landowners take 1/4, and this particular landowner says, you know what? I want 1/3 of it. Okay, and the sharecropper says, fine, you take a third. Now, I might have thought that the sharecropper will think to himself, you know why I let you have a third? I give you more than the usual? Because I had in mind that I would also take from the trees. So we're talking about in a place where the sharecroppers do not have a share in the trees. That's the usual custom. And most of the time they get a third. This sharecropper comes and says, listen, I'll give you a good deal. You could keep a third. He didn't say why. So the landowner's like, okay, this is a nice guy. And then afterwards, the sharecropper said, I gave you a third instead of a quarter because I want part of the trees. So can he do that and change from the local custom? And that's why we need this part of the Braita. Tatish me, not so. You have to say that in advance if you want to change from the local custom. Even though he's taking a different amount, he's giving a different amount than the usual. Back to the Mishnah that says not only do they split the grain that they're producing, but also the stubble and the straw. אמר רב יוסף, בבבל נהיגו דלה יהביא תבנה לאריסה, למאי נפקא מינה, דאי איכא איניש תייהב, עין יפה הוא, ולה גם דינן מיניה. Rav Yosef says in Bavel, the custom is that they do not give any stubble to the sharecropper. Now, why do we need to know that? I mean, just go there and see. I mean, we know the principle. You follow the local custom. Why do you have to tell us what the local custom is in Bavel? And so the answer is we need to know that in case there is one guy or a couple of guys who are very generous and they allow the sharecropper to take some of the stubble. So we don't learn from them because that's not the general custom. So he's telling, Rav Yosef is saying, I did a survey. A few people are generous, but they're not the rule, they're the exception. Amar Rav Yosef, Bukhra ve'tafta ve'arkabta ve'kaneh dechizra de'bal habayit ve'chizra gufe de'arisa. Rav Yosef says that the first, second, and third parts of the earthen boundaries, right? When you have on the boundary around the land, they would put these piles of dirt as a boundary marker and also for some protection. And so all that dirt and the responsibility to make it, that responsibility falls on the owner of the land. However, also the kanim, also the poles that he puts in there, the landowner has to put them. However, the fence itself, that the sharecropper has to provide and build the fence. Kelala de milata kol ikar balma de balabait netiruta yeterta de arisa. How do you know what each one needs to do? There's the basic principle. The main boundary itself, the owner has to do it. And that dirt and the poles are part of the main boundary. Additional protection, that the sharecropper has to do. And that's the fence that you'd put on these would be additional. Amar Rav Yosef, Mara uzbila vedavla vezarnuka de balabait arisa abed be yeore. Rav Yosef, again, this whole series of statements by Rav Yosef says that the hoe and the shovel and the bucket and the irrigation device, the owner of the land has to provide all these tools, but the sharecropper has to actually make the irrigation channels to bring the water from the water source to the field. Back to the Mishnah, just like they divide the grapes and the wine, so too they divide the extra branches that are pruned and the poles that they use to hang the vines on. What do the poles do? These are poles that would be divided in half, and you would hang the vines to support the vines on them. Both the sharecropper and the landowner have to supply the poles. Why do I need to know that? It's explaining the halacha before. Why do they split the poles when they take them back when they don't need them anymore? Because they split the cost in providing them in the first place. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.